different football codes. Some people might like AFL, League, Union. You know, we don't all agree, but we can all learn about each other. You know, that's just an example. But when we talk about culture, this is something that we can all learn about because we all come from different backgrounds, and it is about everyone coming together in unity to learn as we move forward. Okay, as you can see from some of the photos, this is some of the media and marketing they did for World War I to actually have people come and join the Australian Imperial Force. It was called the AIF back then. And it was called the Australian Imperial Force because it was under British rule. It was also known as the war to end all wars, and as we know from history, it obviously wasn't because of World War II. And they were very hard days of fighting in World War I. People left Australia to go overseas to places like Gallipoli, the Western Front, in Europe, to fight in some really harsh conditions. So when we think about what freedoms we have today, think back, have a look at some of these photos, and to realise that we do live in a very lucky country. One of the stories that I'd like to extend on is Indigenous military service. As I mentioned at the start, I served for 20 years. I enlisted in 1986 and I discharged in 2007. So I've been out for 14 years. And I always tell everyone, don't let the hair dye fool you. I'm a lot older than what I look. But it's my mum's good genes. But after having served 20 years in the army, I never knew anything about Indigenous military history until about 5 years after I discharged, because I became chair of Queensland's first Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander memorial for veterans and current serving personnel. And when I became chair, I started learning a lot about our Indigenous military history. The only one I knew when I was in serving for 20 years was a gentleman by the name of Reg Saunders. And that's because his information was located down in the War Memorial in Canberra. So to say that I was shocked is a big understatement, because I was so proud to have served, and I still am proud. It's just that I was, honestly, I was gutted to find out that I never knew anything about Indigenous military history while I was serving. And I'll just tell you one particular story that really hits home for me. And I don't know if you're aware of a gentleman by the name of Len Waters. He was the first Aboriginal fighter pilot in World War II. He flew his plane called Black Magic, and he did something like 92 missions in World War II. And he served for 20 years, and he was a warrant officer. When he discharged from the Air Force, he went to live out at St George, and he wanted to start up an outback flying service. But during that period, in the 40s and 50s, because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders came under a different policy from the government, he was unable to get funding. So he couldn't start his flying business, so he never flew another plane again. So after serving for 20 years, 92 missions in World War II, you know, all he wanted to do was start up his own outback flying service, and he couldn't do it because he wasn't entitled, or nobody would support him in giving him any funding for his business. So you know what he did? He went back to shearing sheep. Here is a man who's qualified He's a qualified mechanic, a qualified pilot, but he couldn't get a job as a pilot, own his own business, but had to go back to shearing sheep. And when you hear stories like that, and there are many others in the same predicament, that is so disappointing to hear.